Fearless and truthful.
Provocative and controversial.
We say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial. Hello and welcome to The Pledge. A report out this week recommended that schools should swap teaching classical composer Mozart for grime artist Stormzy.
You're getting way too big for your boots.
In a bid to make music lessons more relevant to kids, we thought that swapping an old, out-of-touch man for a younger, more popular panelist sounded like a great idea. Nick, you better watch out. There's a new kid on the block. Everyone welcome Rachel Shabby.
Hey, Rachel.
Rachel, you can give us a rendition of your best grime later. Looking forward to it. Coming up on the programme, Carol wants to ban the burqa. Rachel calls for radical action to tackle the climate emergency. Nick thinks we shouldn't penalise private school kids. And June says our young people need inspiration and free university education.
Yeah.
But first, it's me. An economic shock hit the country this week as British Steel was placed into compulsory liquidation. Thousands of jobs are in jeopardy after talks with the government to save Britain's second-largest steel producer broke down. The official receiver has now taken control of the company, which employs more than 4,000 people, with a further 20,000 in the supply chain. In a world that increasingly features large economic blocs such as China, India and the USA, certain British industries are bound to be unable to compete fairly. The decision on whether or not to let them fall should come down to how crucial they are for our country. For its infrastructure, construction, industrial and military uses, steel is one of those industries that must be protected as a matter of national importance. Whether British Steel collapsed because of bad management, a falling pound, or China dumping cheap steel into European markets is secondary to the fact that the government must now step in to save it, at least until a buyer can be found. And if nobody wants to buy it, the government should renationalise it.
Interesting one, this. Let's first see what the government are saying in the shape of Greg Clark, who's the business secretary. We've shown our willingness to act, having already provided the company with £120 million bridging facility to enable it to meet its emissions trading compliance costs. The government can only act within the law, which requires any financial support to a steel company to be on a commercial basis. I have been advised, says Greg Clark, that it would be unlawful to provide a guarantee or loan on the terms of any proposal that the company or any other party has made. So let's put that to one side. There are a couple of interesting facts. I want to challenge you. Yep. You said it must be protected, so bear in mind I'm going to challenge you on that. And there's a fascinating aspect, and credit to Ed Conway for Sky News, who said in the first 2 years, China has manufactured more steel than Britain has since the height of the Industrial Revolution in 1870. How far? I am desperately sorry for the people of Scunthorpe and all the supporting industries. But I ask you this, and indeed other pledgers, it got to the point with coal where it was actually more expensive to get a ton of coal out of the ground than you'd get. Are you saying that you would go that far? I have nothing but sympathy. I just fear that this is another industry, much like coal mining and dockers and printers, that we might have to face an unfortunate truth.
We can see Ed Conway's point here graphically.
This shows you the output from the steel sector in the UK each year over the course of the last years. Going back to 1980, it's about 9 million tonnes or so a year. And you can see in Germany there is a bigger output. In the US, it's about 9 times bigger. But the big story here is what's going on in China. Just look at Chinese steel output over the course of the last few decades. You can see it's an absolutely enormous increase from relatively small amounts in the 1980s up until in the 2000s. It has become, by far and away, the biggest steel producer in the world.
Well, so you saw that, Nick, and it's unbelievable when you see it. Now, I don't know about the quality of the steel, but it is cheap, and they are apparently dumping it onto European markets. So I would still say yes, and only because steel...
You would pay more to... OK.
Only because I think steel is different to coal for one specific reason, and that's its relation to national security and military use. And I think we need to be able to build, for example, our own tanks without having to rely on the Chinese. And just think Huawei, for example.
And I'll just quickly add also the difference with steel and coal is we don't have an alternative. with coal, we had multiple alternatives in terms of, nuclear power and so on. And also, just to add to that, I think we'll be in really dangerous territory if we completely get rid of our steel industry and our manufacturing ability. And then we're in a place where we have to solely rely on a China. That brings all sorts of problems in terms of how they could then hike up the prices when they know we have no alternatives.
I tell you I'd solve it. We are currently got the biggest building project in the whole of Europe with HS2.
Yeah.
We've got Crossrail in London. We've got that Palace of Westminster surrounded in scaffolding. I would mandate you have to buy British steel or a British supplier, because a lot of that is not being supplied by Britain.
Yeah. You know, it's a head and a heart thing for me. This, my heart is desperately sad.
Steel's quite hard.
Heart, not heart.
Oh, right.
It's a head and heart thing for me. So my heart is desperately sad for the 5,000 people and the 20,000 supply chain. And growing up in the northeast, I've watched so many industries die, and I've seen what happens to the communities as a result of that. And there's a big thing that says to me, if we can bail the banks out, why can't we bail the people of Scunthorpe out? However, all that said, my head tells me we can't keep bailing out failing industries. We've got to find new industries that are competitive, and I know that the young people of Scunthorpe have been brought up believing that industry is their only option, and I think my head tells me that 30 million that they want should be spent on retraining, relocating these people to go into a different profession, because it's not. Last month the government paid 100 million quid to pay the carbon bill for the EU.
But I mean, it's worth pointing out that Britain isn't the only country that manufactures steel and is up against, cheap Chinese, essentially dumping, aggressive steel dumping. Other countries also have steel industries. The reason that they survive is a mixture of things. One of the things is that they have state management of industrial policy, which countries with a manufacturing base should do. We don't. The other thing, and I'm gonna, you're gonna get a flavour of where I'm coming from. Absolutely, we should be renationalising an industry like steel, which we rely on for the reasons that Maajid said. Security, defence, automation, railways, of course.
Infrastructure.
But also, if we are looking at an industry where, we're looking at 5,000 direct jobs and 20,000 indirect jobs, that is not just collapsing an industry. That is collapsing a community. And if the government isn't supposed to intervene in those cases, I don't know what it's for.
You saw that graph that showed. You saw that graph that said in the past 22 months how much China has produced and how much we produced. So how is it sustainable, and who's going to pay for it?
But that's exactly why we have to intervene. That chart is why we have to intervene. Because we see where this is going.
Why? I don't get the logic.
If we bail the banks out,
well, that's a good
why
point.
not the steel industry?
But Rachel, where does it end? If we bail out Scunthorpe, and there's a very valid. Do we bail out Port Talbot for the car workers? Do we bail? Where does it stop?
Well, let's take a sector-by-sector analysis. But certainly, we have a thriving British steel industry. There's nothing wrong with it. Those are good jobs, and steel is something that we will always need. So there is a case for. There is a case.
No, actually, it is thriving.
It is a thriving industry. It certainly is in other countries. Look at Germany. It's badly managed. And the difference is that somewhere like Germany has state direction of its manufacturing, because they understand that you can't leave it to the market. If you leave it to the market, this is exactly what happens.
I just want to take on a point from Rachel. You said it's thriving. It's not thriving. The private equity, the firm that bought it, Greybull Capital, they pledged to invest 400 million quid in it. It's not working.
Well, so this is what Rachel was referring to, because actually few industries have increased their productivity as much as steel in the past couple of decades. For all its image as a failing sector, the steel industry produces more bang for the buck than most other parts of UK industry and companies.
And my point about the chart, the reason why we must protect our steel industry, that chart to me tells us where this thing is headed, and I think it's too dangerous. We cannot get to a place where we allow China to completely dominate the steel industry for the world.
We're in that place.
We're in the place if we allow this company to go down, and we shouldn't let it happen.
And also just to refocus on the huge personal costs. I mean, this is collapsing a community, and let's hear from somebody from that community. We have steelworker Callum Wright.
I can't see where the other jobs are going to come in this town, and also with my children, obviously I want them to have a better life. There's nothing much here for us, so it's mainly keeping these works open at this stage.
So we can't just all shake our heads and say that's so sad. We can actually prevent this from happening, and it's not just workers.
For how long?
How many families are affected? How many children are affected? This is going to have widespread consequences for an entire community and an entire region, and we can direct that.
And
the state can direct.
You're talking to someone who grew up in a mining community, and I saw exactly what happened there, and it was tragic. But I think we've learned from that, and hopefully now we would be able to retrain people like that young man we've just seen.
But this is different, Carol. We're always going to need steel.
We don't want to make coal anymore.
We don't want to make coal anymore. So there's a difference. And also, back to your point, you're saying how long. There is a way to sort it out so that how long doesn't become an issue in terms of making sure that we mandate that British companies have to use British steel.
Do you know, June, I hope you're right. I really hope there's a way to save it. It breaks my heart to think of all those people being out of work. I really hope there is a way.